All right, let's bring you this story now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced an increase to the NERSA licensing threshold for what's called embedded generation projects. It's been moved from 1 megawatt to a whopping 100 megawatts. This move, described by the president as bold and urgent, comes on the back of rolling blackouts that have paralyzed the country's economic recovery. Independent power producers have long advocated for greater flexibility, if you like, in government policy in order to enable investment and reduce their reliance on the national grid. Let's get you some reaction on this story now. Bring in Professor Mark Swilling. He is the co-director of the Center of Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University. Prof, thanks for your time and patience. Lovely to have you on the AM report. Let's begin with whether, you agree with what the president has said about this being a bold and urgent move. I've also seen commentary where people have actually lauded this as a game changer. Are all those accurate readings?
They definitely are, and I strongly support it, and it's long overdue.
But what does it mean then for ordinary South Africans? I'm tempted to actually even want you to help us break down what embedded generation actually means for the ordinary man on the street.
Well, embedded generation basically means, to put it very crudely, solar panels on your roof or on the rooftops of the nearby mall or the school or the municipal buildings, generating electricity that for own use in your own home or for selling to other people if that is allowed. So that's what embedded generation basically means. But what the president was also talking about is standalone power plants that are not embedded in a building, but are standalone next to a mine or a factory, or even up the west coast of the Western Cape. Yeah.
And embedded generation as well as renewable energy are almost used hand in hand in most of these conversations. Yes. Help us understand how to connect those dots.
Well, what embedded generation means is embedding renewable energy, such as solar panels or a small windmill in your home, or a bigger type of infrastructure on top of a roof of a mall or a municipal building. So embedded generation means renewable energy.
Right.
In this context, yeah.
Help us then understand why it had taken so long to get here. It's probably a question to be posed to the president. But as a person who has been in the space and has been advocating in some respects for embedded generation to take place, what were some of the red tapes that, I guess, allowed government to drag this process for as long as it has?
It wasn't just red tape. It was a policy position by the Minister of Minerals and Energy and the Departments of Mineral and Energy who did not believe that it made sense for a vast multiplicity of private sector players and homes to be able to generate electricity for own use and onto the grid because of what it might do to Eskom. It reduces Eskom's income. And at a time when actually Eskom needs a lot more income. But Eskom can't meet the energy requirements of the country, which is why we have sluggish economic growth. And Eskom can't do that because its power stations are old and they need to be closed down. And we need energy quickly. And the only way to build energy quickly is with renewables. But the minister was not convinced about that. So as he said yesterday, the president had to twist his arm. He used those words. The president twisted my arm.
Wow. It becomes difficult to try to get a sense of how people will not be left behind, even with embedded generation now in the mix, especially because of the price tag that's potentially attached to this.
Well, that's true. But what you need to realize is that renewable energy now costs less than coal. So a new renewable energy power plant costs less than keeping an old coal-fired plant going. And that's really important to realize and to note.
How much of a gap does embedded generation actually fill, even with the regulations allowing for 100 megawatts to be produced, especially in a context where we know that the demand is in the thousands for Eskom, which is what in some respects has necessitated things like load shedding?
Well, what one needs to remember is there's going to be a lead time. So load shedding is not going to disappear tomorrow. It takes time to bring all of these new infrastructures online. So, we got load shedding at least for the next year. But we can't really answer your question very, very clearly because we don't know how quickly households and IPPs and businesses and mines and factories, how quickly they're going to get their proposals together to submit to NERSA, how quickly that is going to be approved, and then we will get this extra. But one thing is for sure, all the studies show that this is the quickest way to bring new power onto the grid or to reduce the demand of big consumers of energy on the grid. So it's that double function. You can bring new power onto the grid and you reduce the demand on the grid. And that in turn eases the life of Eskom, who has to keep the lights on with old power stations, many of which need to be closed because they're too old, over 40 years old.
It's quick to get us to where we want to be, but is it reliable enough to get us as far as we want to go?
Yeah, renewable energy is the fastest growing source of energy in the world at the moment. The total quantity of money being spent on renewables globally is double the total amount of money being spent on fossil fuels and nuclear combined. People are not going to be spending money on an energy source that's unreliable. And we have some of the best radiation and wind resources in the world. We are almost like a global capital of the best solar and wind resources in the world, and yet we are lagging the rest of the world in building the most reliable and cheapest source of energy available. And that's fact. That's not just an interpretation.
Sure. I wonder whether this is the first of many steps to come from government. It's almost as if once you open the tap, you can't really close it up, especially if this works out. Do you envision a situation where, if we do get this right, government will have its own arm twisted to allow for even more renewable energy through IPPs?
Well, don't forget, we've just had an announcement that what is called the fifth bid window is open for 2,600 megawatts. So there's already announcements that have been made. The emergency round allocations have also got considerable amount of renewables. So we've already seen the minister actually making provision for nearly 5,000 megawatts of renewables already. So the door is already wide open. That's massive. That's equal in 1 year to what it's taken 10 years to build thus far. So it's already massive. This is another addition. I personally am a bit worried about this particular initiative because it unlocks things in a way which is not very predictable. I'm a bit worried about the stability of the grid as a whole vast multiplicity of new generation comes online, which haven't been integrated into a coherent plan. But this is what happens when you don't have a good plan. Then suddenly in the last minute, because of a crisis, which is what we have now, you then have to kind of switch on a whole bunch of stuff, and you don't really know exactly how it's going to pan out. That's not great planning, that's reactive.
Yeah, given that very quickly then, Prof, what would you suggest is the best strategy to be taken by government? Allowing households to first utilize this newly given provision, or should we rather leave it to big business for whatever reason?
It's definitely in the financial interest of households to put solar hot water heaters and PV panels on their rooftops financially over the next 20 years. It saves them a lot of money. So I definitely think that is necessary. Factories and mines, big factories and mines and malls should be doing the same thing. But we also need to give much greater emphasis to municipalities, to cooperatives, to socially owned forms of renewable energy generation that doesn't result in profits disappearing and landing up in Rome, but stay in the country, stay in the local towns, stay in the local areas. So we need a just transition, not just more reliable electricity. We need a just transition where renewable energy contributes to the development of our communities in the most unequal society in the world.
Absolutely. We can never move our eye off that target. Professor Mark Swilling, thanks very much indeed for your time. Great chatting to you. He is the co-director for the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University. Once again, thanks very much indeed.